So let me quickly introduce our panelists here today. So we have Piers O'Donoghue, Director for Future Networks at the European Commission's DG Connect. And we have Adriana Groh, the CEO of the Sovereign Tech Agency in Germany. We have Dr. Cristina Caffarra, Associate Fellow at CEPR. She's a leading economist on antitrust and digital regulation. And for the open source people in the room, a person with a lot of heft in the policy discussions in Brussels. We have Peter Ganten, board member of APPEL, the European Open Source Business Association, and chairman of the German Open Source Business Alliance, and the CEO of Univention. And we have Amandine Lepape, CEO and co-founder of Element, co-founder of Matrix.org, and she's a member of the European Open Source Academy. So, starting off with a question to all of you. We'll see who jumps on it first. Considering that I just said a bunch of optimistic things about Europe's potential to solve its current digital challenges using open source, I would like to ask you, when we look at Europe's place right now in the digital landscape, maybe more broadly speaking, just its strategic position, what should our sense of urgency be? What is truly at stake right now? And I'm going to send it straight to Cristina first, because we just spoke about it before I got on stage.
Thank you, Astor. Oh my God, you throw this ball at me. I mean, I had just yesterday a big event here in Brussels talking about time of truth for Europe, the general picture of our economic circumstances, of course, and a lot of emphasis on the digital situation. And I have to tell you, the landscape was incredibly depressing. I'll try and be saying something maybe a bit positive towards the end, but let's absolutely wake up. Absolutely wake up. I've been saying this for years. I've been one of the first to say, what are we regulating for? I think we have been in a collective delusion that digital regulation, although useful, was going to absolutely create a level playing field for European companies. It hasn't, it isn't, it won't. Even if it were enforced, which it isn't, it will not do it. And the question really is, where does that leave us? A continent which is colonized by big tech, in which we have no real agency, where they own the kill switch, and where we continue to be blackmailed by them in creating assets which they tell us we can call our sovereign assets, because, you know, they're here, but they're not sovereign, they own it. And so my plea, and I'll try and be brief, is that we really need perhaps to use this moment as an opportunity to do something concrete. Build, don't regulate, or at least don't stop a regulation. There's a saying, bring the demo, not the memo. This is the time when we've done memos and memos and memos, and now it's time to do the build. Final thing I will say is that I had a number of champions in the conference yesterday, and I brought them over to Europe just to tell it like it is. And frankly, one of them he's the industrial policy advisor to President Trump, was brutal. He said in front of 1,000 people, we don't care about the EU. You're all a bunch of losers. You're sitting around talking about democracy. We won't deal with you. We are going to go directly to the capitals, Paris, Germany. In fact, Hungary. Orban is our best friend. Meloni. These are the people we want to deal with. Whoever are you, we don't care. So I don't know if we need a bigger wake-up call than this. But, you know, friends, I'm a European. I feel passionate about this. And I feel that there is not enough of a sense of urgency in our institutions. We are, from an economic perspective, I had a whole morning of discussion of the geopolitics and the economic circumstances. It is dire. Germany is facing its Detroit moment. Life is still too comfortable for us in Europe to be frankly terrified, because we have a lifestyle which is high quality. But what's ahead is what Draghi says. It's the precipice. We can't continue this social and economic contract into the future. So, to conclude, unless we take this as a wake-up call, we start building digital infrastructure that is ours, which we own, on which we can build business, I think we're lost. It is a very pessimistic message, but I think it needs to be made.
I will put a... I will put a pin in what you talked about building, because that is one of the big things we're going to talk about here today, since we have the builders in the room. And Piers, I won't ask you to speak for all of the EU or all of the European Commission, even though I want to. But on the point of urgency, would you say from your conversations with the member states, is this sense of urgency shared? Are some just wait and see? What signals are you getting from the capital?
There is clearly an increased sense of urgency, but the problem I perceive is that it is not equally shared, and also there's still not sufficient vision as to a collective vision as to how it needs to be treated. So the first urgency clearly is we need to act so that Cristina doesn't collapse into a complete black depression. More seriously, the other urgency is what we observe from what Cristina has said, is we just think about the past. When we observe the increasingly fast, rapid cycle of technology development, what happened with the first wave of internet technologies was that they were disruptive, they were very good for the economy, but then certain players were able to get into an oligopolistic, if not monopolistic position, which leaves us in the position where we are now. With the advent of a new wave of technology under AI, we have to anticipate that happening again and ensure that Europe is able to actually compete and does not allow itself to fall into the trap of again being the consumer of others' technologies. So there I'm fully aligned with what Cristina said. So with terms of the member states, now I know that there will be sighs and groans, but then this is a Brussels bureaucrat speaking. So to get the member states together, that's why the Commission issued on Wednesday the competitiveness compass. Now, as a piece of paper, that's not going to achieve anything in its own. It is the ambition which it sets out. It is a response to Draghi, which was almost as depressing as Cristina, but it is a need to shake the member states into realization that not only is that problem or that set of problems real, but we have to act together to solve them. And that is why I think we have to stop paying attention to mouthpieces of foreign administration who want us to doubt ourselves. We shouldn't gauge our response in the basis of what another geopolitical player thinks of us. We have to have confidence about Europe, just as we have to have confidence about open source in order to act together. But certainly we have to believe in the internal market, we have to believe in acting together, because we do and can punch above our weight with regard to technologies, with regard to the human-centric nature of as to how we regulate and put framing on that technology. And we should work quickly to solve that problem. And I would say the last response is, of course, if the member states, some of them aren't getting it, then everyone in this room has an obligation and a duty to those in government that you know or can get to, that it is made clear to them just how serious the challenge is. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Piers. And talking about member states that are doing things, of course, I'm looking with my biased open source policy eyes. Germany has made some very interesting moves in the last few years. So, Adriana, of course, the Sovereign Tech Agency, but also the Center for Digital Sovereignty, CENDIS, the building of the sovereign cloud stack. And what I find very fascinating is that there seems to be very broad political agreement in Germany around this, from right to left, including the Greens. Adriana, what drove this political agreement, and what helped Germany draw the conclusion that open source should be central to these initiatives?
Maybe it's that we just explained the world as it is before we talked about how it could be if we do the right steps. Because I think what happened before already To use words from a conference yesterday, we had a perfect storm already with a pandemic and with a war that escalated in Europe, with the first Trump administration. Lots of things came together that made the invisible visible for more people. And with that, I mean infrastructures that we are relying on. And they mostly function, so we don't think about them. In the moment they break, or in the moment of crisis, when you need to be fast, you need to innovate, you really see how reliant you are. And you don't have the time in a moment of crisis to build the infrastructure, because you need to innovate to solve a problem that you didn't have yesterday. And that really shows you that if the infrastructure is not in place, you lost already. So we focus on explaining this, making the digital infrastructure more visible and why it's so critical and important, and not a nice to have, but a real must have, and that it is something that we need to pay for because we're using it every day and it doesn't rain from the heavens. So with this very clear and I would say simple message, we talked to different political stakeholders, and yes, it's I think a special situation that when we started working on a feasibility study, like how we could do this, how we could invest in digital infrastructure, we talked to the Ministry of Economic Affairs, which was run by the Conservatives. And they were fully supportive of this. And when the Sovereign Tech Fund back in the day was announced by the Ministry of Economic Affairs, it was done by the Greens. And there was no friction between this, because this is not a political party issue. This is something where we just need to face realities and then take actions and secure what we're already using, and not even thinking yet about the alternatives, which is a next step. But if you don't secure the foundations, you will not be able to innovate, you will not be able to come up with alternatives that are really competitive. And that was a very clear message. And just to also emphasize this, we weren't the first or the only ones calling for this. I think the whole open source community for quite some time always pointed out maintenance. We need to maintain what's there. This innovation fetish that we're having is not healthy. And it's wasting time, it's wasting resources, it's not sustainable, it doesn't get us anywhere if we're not at the same time making sure that we have secure, reliable infrastructure. And I think we can all agree that this is not left or right or whatever topic, this is common sense.
And then I'm thinking, since we, put that pin in the topic of building, Peter, as the chairman of the Open Source Business Alliance in Germany, you represent a lot of the builders in Germany in this space. So if we're, I would be interested in just your members' experience of the last few years of political decisions and efforts. How are they perceived by the German open source business community? Are they seeing tangible changes on the ground? Are things happening?
That's an important question. First of all, I must say I fully think you are right with what you said, and we were trying, like what Adriana also said, to tell this to politicians since, I would say since the first Trump administration, at least. And we, in OSBA, when the current, now outgoing German government started, we really embraced it. We thought this is really a new way of thinking things. The coalition treaty was really path leading, and they did a few very good things, like the foundation of Zendes, like also the Sovereign Tech Agency. One has to say, although, that these were, like Adriana said, initiatives already started by the former government, which is good, because maybe we will have a new government with other parties soon. They also did some work on regulation. We have now the obligation to use open source in business administration, business applications for the administration, Fachverfahren, German word. That's good, but in general, we think it is really not enough, and it will not move us forward. We are speaking about a few million euros here, and at the same time, the government is spending an increasing amount of money, billions, for proprietary software licenses. And this money is used to further tighten the dependency we have on this. We are paying for our own dependency here, and right now we are using it's not even percent, it's promille. Is that the right English word? Yeah, little pieces to do a little bit, and that will not work. That will not work out. We also see. In senior government, I have to say this also in the Chancellery, people who think this open source stuff will never work. Let's go with Microsoft. Let's press the states to buy Microsoft. And this is really not helpful. And what we need and what we are asking for is really a commitment to only buy open source software. And I'm not speaking about custom development of some business application. I'm speaking about the core applications of the administration, like Office, like cloud services, and so on. We need a change here. Thank you. And the idea we are now discussing and trying to discuss with the parties is that we need a policy like, let's say in 2035, we will only buy open source software, because that would unleash really major investments also from the industry to build the applications we need. I also, what I've forgotten to say, what is really on the positive side is Tennis and open code. We have now about, I think, 2,000 projects run somehow by the government on open code. That's really great, and also I think a good example for what can be done in other places. So maybe I stop here.
And Amandine, I'm going off-piece from the script straight away here. But from your point of view, there are two things I want to ask you. One is prepared and one is I just thought of now. But as a CEO of an open source business that does business with very sensitive parts of governments, you both deal with the trust element, but there's one thing that I want to ask, and Peter, maybe you can chip in on this as well. Is the European open source industry, as we see it today, ready to meet a very large increase in demand, not just from, let's say, the public sector, but also traditional industry? In case of crisis, are you ready to build?
That's a good question. Are we ready to build? I think we're really keen to start building. The thing is, we still have limited resources, because the way people buy open source is still not right. And we have the teams we have doing the best we can and still competing with giants who have, I don't know, 1,000 times bigger teams, trying to keep pace with the innovation, trying to keep pace with everything moving on and build applications which are as good and as easy and as featureful to use as proprietary alternatives. Because it's open source, so no one wants to pay for it. They may want to fund the feature, but who is going to pay for the maintenance? That's precisely what Adriana was saying. Yay, let's innovate in open source. And then what? Who is taking it and bringing it to market? Who is hiring the big product team and the big design team that is needed to make it to the right level? Otherwise, organizations just hire developers and say, oh, but I'm contributing, here is a bit of code. And then what? It's not aligned with the product direction. It's you need to work with these people to get them aligned, which means you cannot actually take it where you want it to go. You still need engineers to review the push, the PRs, and like work with the developers who are contributing. It's some effort on our side. And then you have people who just take it and use it for free because it's here, it's open, why do I pay for it? So for me, that's really the core. We would be ready if people were actually providing some sustainable funding to the open source businesses so that they could run as real businesses who have strong some recurring funding and revenue to actually take the product where it should be. There is, like, when you think of it, how many of the big open source companies are building user-facing applications? Like Firefox? Like based on revenue model. You can say, oh, Signal is a good open source application, which is user-facing. It's funded by donations. Thunderbird is pretty good, but funding by donations, and it's not that used outside the technical community. So yeah, beyond Firefox, that's probably the only ones. Everyone else is building open source businesses on things which are not user-facing, because user-facing apps is hard when you are competing with giants.
Peter, are you ready?
I also fully support what you said. We need a better understanding for business models and how to procure and how to buy open source software. By the way, we are working on that in OSPA. We will publish a paper for public administrations, how to buy and procure open source software in a way that it is sustainable and that you get long-term liability and a company serving you who's actually able to develop the product and drive it forward. And we need this mindset in the administration and also, of course, in the industry. I think we see it more in the industry right now compared to the public sector. There's sometimes still the mindset, well, I can download it and install it, and then it's for free, and then half a year later, I see I have a big problem, and this absolutely does not help because it will burn the ground, and people will think open source does not work in the way it should, but it does. As I tried to say it in my first statement, of course, we do not employ the amount of developers and the amount of consultants and what have you right now the proprietary world has. We are building this. We also, I'm part of the European Open Source Consortium, where we try to build building a network of well-known great companies which are very successful in their local markets to provide scalable European service packages and solutions and to make it easier and more easy to trust in these solutions compared to the very big companies. But then we need a long-term plan also. We need a policy like we did it with electric cars. We will only buy open source in the year 2035, and then investments will follow and we will scale up. The foundation is built, and now we need a plan to scale up, and then we will deliver for sure.
Then I wonder, Piers, because of course, especially this time of the cycle of mandates, everyone in Brussels and in Europe will come to the Commission with a long list of wishes that they want to have fulfilled by you. But I'm thinking, from my just 7-8 years in Brussels working with these questions, the European Commission's engagement with open source in many different ways has dramatically increased at the level of ambition. So I was wondering, could you just point out and highlight some key efforts and explain why open source is central to these projects? Or put it differently, looking at your challenges and problems that you're faced with, how can open source help you?
Well, of course, it is all about me. Our mandate is to make sure that best-in-class digital technologies are made available to all sectors of the European economy at the most available and cheapest possible way, while ensuring security, not just of the systems, security of the companies, security of the user, and of course security of data. And that is why open source is inevitably part of the answer. What I find very interesting is that when you say that our engagement has increased, there was a certain amount of patronizing, patting on the head. This is a very interesting tool for some social modeling around the fringes of the economy. And I'm saying no one here, and I was never responsible for that kind of thinking, but there was a certain sense that this community needs to be protected and shielded. What I'm hearing today is actually, for me, the real sign that the open source community is coming of age, is maturing, because you are prepared openly with your peers to be self-critical about the fact that so much is being done and not maintained. And then if it isn't going to be maintained, why do it in the first place? And maybe some of our funding models have been responsible for that, because we'll give you grant aid for 3 years, but once the grant aid stops, who's going to maintain the code? Who's going to maintain, or is it just going to be parked in a foundation library somewhere? So we mature with you. We learn as to how it is that open source needs to operate in the big bad world. Just like the Cyber Resilience Act, which I'm actually putting on that list of things that you want to know what the Commission has done for open source, despite that everyone in the room hated it. It was a recognition that open source is every bit as viable and has a lot more attributes to drive economic growth than proprietary software. But if that is the case, it will also have to respond to security requirements, public service requirements, missions, including particularly security, which we know it is perfectly capable of doing. So yes, we have now written into what is a piece of infrastructure investment and policy development, which is the connectivity compute continuum. We have written into that a clear element of open source, and therefore a pilot and subsequent actions for an open source stack, which should drive the use of compute out to the edge, the use of AI for the development of all sectors of the economy, particularly also then the inference of AI. And it needs to be open source based. And that is one of the tools, so that we're hardwiring that. It's not, as Amelina said, it's not a consumer-facing investment, but it is something that is critical to what the Commission is doing with the Member States on high-performance computing, on AI factories, on the development of advanced, secure communications. And we can't do that with somebody else's proprietary technology. We can't do, as somebody accused us of doing 10 years ago, of trying to build our own Microsoft. What would be the point? We'd never get there anyway. It would be a huge waste of resources, and we'd look very silly. No, because we don't actually want that lock-in, because you create an environment which results in oligopoly and lock-in, and that actually reduces innovation. The last point I'd make, again, as a more typical example, which has its weaknesses, procurement. We have the simple middleware, because we are investing hugely in the data spaces, which will become viable simply because they will allow the communities to generate regions, but more particularly sectors, their data, according to governance rules which they establish, but which will then be able to get a return from those who wish to exploit that data. And we want an open source middleware platform which allows all of that data to be interconnected through the data spaces, rather than individual data spaces choosing the model, the shiny model that comes with ribbons, but which will lock them into one system forever. So those are a couple of the very specific projects that we're doing. But in policy terms as well, you're quite right to say that if we are to have the answers to the challenges which Draghi put to us, which Letta put to us, which are stated in the competitiveness compass, we actually have to bring open source into the central discussion.
And Cristina, I'm thinking, since you kind of set up the panel with your first response, how about you just make some comments of the things that have been stated so far, and I would ask you to also try to link it to your pitch around the Euro stack.
Yes. So I want to double down on the message that I started off with, because we are at risk on a nice Brussels panel to just, comfort each other and fall asleep in the hope that somehow things will work out. The reality is we are a colony. I mean, we are today. 90% of our infrastructure is owned by big tech. How did that happen? How did that happen to us in Europe? Well, it happened because of various reasons, including the fact that we directed all our efforts into regulation. We have funneled all our energy into regulation in the last few years. I'm not saying that we should repeal it and we shouldn't have had it, or that it isn't a useful expression of democracy. Please don't go there. I'm saying, as the only thing we did, it was a massive mistake, because it isn't delivering. It cannot deliver anything other than nibbling at the margin. It isn't dispersing the power of the companies. It isn't creating alternative infrastructures. And we need to understand power if we are to make any progress. Amandine rightly says, in Europe we are amazing. We have incredible R&D capabilities, and our programmers are incredible. They get employed elsewhere. But then the productization doesn't happen. The step from proof of concept into something viable doesn't happen. We need to understand how that process works. I worked as a consultant for years for Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, against Google and Meta. And the learning there is that, they are, of course, incredibly competent, incredibly capable, incredibly organized and driven. And don't sit around talking about democracy, which is what, my Trumpian friend was saying yesterday. So the question we need to crunch is how we go on building. Where is the funding coming from? I don't just look at the European Commission, frankly, because, Piers, I do not want this to be, of course, personal to you, but the notion that the European Commission has a sense of urgency is bewildering. Even the competitiveness report is Lisbon 2000, cut and paste update. What is it? Is that a response to drag? Is an intention, an expression of intention? We will do this. There are some pieces of apple pie one could eat in that report. So when we read that the Commission will introduce, maybe with the wind behind, some rule about procurement European in public services, one reads it and says, why just public services? I mean, it's a scandal in the first place that if I have a video session with the Commission, I use Teams, and not just the Commission, other countries. Why is the public administration using Microsoft? But in addition to that, what is so wrong with saying buy European to companies? You want cloud? 30% of your needs must come from Europe. Tough. This is buy European. Europe first. And Americans do it. China does it. Why can't we do it? Being patriotic is somewhat a sin in this way. So, I mean, what is the reason we do not have this kind of rules? Oh, competition law prevents discrimination. Are we serious? Are we serious about this? Go and talk to Donald Trump and see how serious he is about us being losers. So, I mean, we need to just move, act. The Eurostack initiative is one that I cobbled together with some friends who are technologists, Robin Berger, Vittorio Bertola, all these people will be known to you, but also others who are economists, others who are Sebastiano Tofaletti from the digital SMEs. What was scary to us is really the sense that the infrastructure is completely theirs. We don't have the kill switch. And if this infrastructure turns hostile, see Trump. I mean, yesterday, the crash in Washington is the fault of the diversity policies. I mean, we are in another universe right now, but we should have seen it coming in 2014 because we fell asleep, because Trump 1.0 was not a blip. I mean, yesterday at my conference, Adam Tooze said, we were all comforted and fell asleep yet again. And finally, and I don't mean, this is not personal to Piers in any way, who is trying his best from inside, but somebody at my conference said yesterday, a founder and a business, the 8 worst words in the English language you can hear as a founder from a lobbyist is, I will introduce you to DigiConnect. I'll leave it there.
Peter?
Yeah, just one point.
It was a mic drop.
I just want to add one point. In regards to the buy European idea. I understand it. I think it's important in many cases, but we also have to be careful. The whole open source ecosystem is about international cooperation. And we should not build new walls. Yeah, I just want everyone to understand this.
I understand you have to say this, but I'm talking not about open source code. I'm talking about another one.
I know.
I'm talking about, cloud and connectivity, these kind of infrastructure assets.
And I agree. The providers of this infrastructure should be, in most cases at least, European. The software vendors and the builders can be everywhere as long as we have the competence to work with them, to understand the code and to build on it. And I think we need to remember this also, yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry, but if we're in the business of interrupting each other, then I'm going to say to Cristina, I don't take any of it personally. I just really think that we need to have a view, not just on regulation, and I can come back to that. It's simply that we have spent a significant amount of energy recently with regard specifically to infrastructure. The work that is going at every layer of the chain in terms of compute and connectivity capacity with investment, also creating the conditions for the real money in terms of scale to come from the private sector on high-performance computing, on AI factories, and now on edge and edge nodes, in order to provide a sovereign, independent infrastructure on which open source software can run, on which open AI can run, and on which European startups can provide their services. Also, it's interesting, despite your criticisms, Cristina, that you yourself then say the solution is regulation, because in order to introduce a Buy EU or an EU procurement rules, we have to regulate. So you need to be consistent with your own criticism.
No, don't misunderstand me.
I didn't misunderstand you.
No, what I'm saying is that regulation, taming big tech directly with DMA is a waste of time. So that's the regulation I think is a waste of time. But it is great that you're doing this stuff, but there's also a concern about what exactly it is that the Commission is supporting and building. AI factories, I haven't heard a single businessman who says this is a great idea. I don't know what to use with this for. When I talk about Eurostack, the Commission doesn't want to engage in this. The Commission doesn't want to engage. They pull speakers from panels that talk about Eurostack. This is the reality. Why? I don't know, but there is no engagement. So I'm not encouraged.
Quickly, Adriana.
I'm quoting Robin from a panel yesterday when he said, okay, we need less sovereign talk and more sovereign walk. And in Germany, I think we managed in the last couple of years to build an ecosystem of organizations to cater to the needs of an ecosystem. We are also learning and evolving, but we have blueprints where I think I can talk also for Slanders and others here in the room. We're really interested in making this a European approach and to scale this up. So I think what we should do is act and use what we tested, what is working, and make it bigger and make it more effective, make it a cooperation, and just get going, because we really need to. There's a sense of urgency, I think.
And yeah, to jump on this, basically, I think it's a question of individual responsibility, right? Of course, we have the Commission here to say you should buy European or you should be sovereign, blah, blah, blah. But every single organization should be able to figure that out. Like, if you're a local government, a national government, it is your own responsibility to think about what you're doing and whether you want to be under the control of some foreign software company, or if you want to have the control and you can use open source software from wherever it comes in the world, but at least it's under your control and you run it and you know what's happening to it. So it's great if the Commission can push and help by guidelines or regulation or whatever, but yes, looking at blueprints, promoting the successful initiatives, and every organization taking their own responsibility is what we really need to be pushing for.
But who is going to do anything other than buy Microsoft or AWS or Google? Because that's the incentive, the economic incentive of, who in a company says, oh, let's do sovereignty? This is not how business works. They're going to go to the cheapest provider, the one that gives them any form of credibility and security, and that is what they do. So there needs to be some form of mandate, because otherwise it's not going to happen spontaneously. The belief in sovereignty is not something that's going to light the fire. It is something that needs, of course, push, a pincer movement from multiple sources. There is, however, a need for grassroots organization, not of the kind of stay at home and write bullet points variety, but of the type that goes out and joins up. So Eurostack, look, I have to say, it's not a lobby group. None of us is paid. We're all volunteers. We're not getting a penny. We're not paid by anyone. It is all completely from the sort of for the good of our soul. And the point is that we need to aggregate people who believe in this and move it up. And it needs to involve business, because without business, no one listens. Frankly, we can be a civil society organization and write the bullet points in elasticated pants and slippers at home, and it doesn't go anywhere. No one listens.
Christina, I have to break in, because I am supposed to be a strict time enforcer, and I've already broken our own rules. But I think right now, the challenge is immense, but from what I gather from this conversation is that the playbook is actually quite straightforward. We need to build high-quality alternatives. We need to ensure that all users, big industry, individuals, or governments can switch to these alternatives, and we need to make sure that they're sustainable both financially and technologically over time. Let's start with that. So the program has started. Thank you very much to all these panelists.